Welcome to Deerhound Productions. I'm Dancat33, and I'll be explaining how I believe that Secret of the Mimic improved upon the last free-roam FNAF game, that being Security Breach. And don't get me wrong, I love Security Breach. It introduced a lot of good things, but at its core, it's very flawed. Its DLC Ruin, on the other hand, was a much better installment, and a lot of what made that entry so good carried on to Secret of the Mimic. A significant reason why I think this newest installment works so well is that it reintroduces a bunch of core concepts from the original games. While I do enjoy the newer installments more than the originals, they lack many core FNAF elements. Scott Cawthon's original games were dark and dreary, with frequent paranormal events or Easter eggs. Steelwool's games, while having great environmental design, didn't quite have that same atmosphere. Security Breach takes place at Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, a giant flashy mall-like entertainment venue. It's a fantastic location in the FNAF universe, and very well designed. But that being said, it doesn't really work for a horror game. Its bright atmosphere derails the game's horror. It's cool to walk around in, but ultimately isn't very scary. However, that would change with the release of Ruin. The DLC follows the events of Security Breach, and the Pizzaplex has since been abandoned, making for a much scarier environment. There are ominous sounds and crashes that ring throughout the dilapidated building, and the darker atmosphere makes the establishment much more unsettling. It's a major step up from the base game, and was quite effective for a first-time experience. However, on subsequent playthroughs it isn't nearly as effective, mostly because the DLC relies on a lot of scripted jump scares to terrify the player. Luckily, Secret of the Mimic handles this even better. Almost every area in the game's main location, Murray's Costume Manor, or MCM for short, is dark, making for a pretty chilling atmosphere. Even the areas with warmer lighting don't feel quite as inviting. The mood is still unsettling, especially with the Mimic lurking around. The game features a fantastic gimmick with the Mimic. The endoskeleton can hide in any costume you encounter, so you'll never quite know when or where the animatronic will appear. I think the section that best utilizes this is the workshops. In this zone, you have to sneak around and collect parts for a spring-lock suit, but the entire area is littered with mascot costumes, one of which the Mimic is hiding inside. This was by far the most tense part of my playthrough. The Mimic can appear in any of these costumes with little warning, so sneaking past them was quite terrifying. It's especially bad if the Mimic activates in front of you, forcing you to either hide or find a path around him. As a big fan of the books, this was especially awesome. The gameplay is very reminiscent of how the teens in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues had to sneak around the pizza place and the Mimic would ambush them. Along with this darker atmosphere and great enemy comes with the return of paranormal activity. While the original games had some sci-fi undertones with very advanced robots and often studying Remnant, the newer games lean much more heavily into sci-fi. And while I enjoy all the crazy animatronics and technology, Hauntings have always been a major part of the series. Paranormal aspects were almost entirely absent from Security Breach. But when Ruin was released, it implied that the Pizzaplex's wet floorbots are haunted by the spirits of those who perished in the building. And a minor character named Maskbot was later revealed to be possessed by the protagonist from Help Wanted 2. It's much more subtle than the original games, but still a neat inclusion. Secret of the Mimic, on the other hand, has a much bigger focus on Hauntings. It initially starts very subtle, with flickering lights, cutouts randomly playing audio, and an elephant head that will sometimes glow, implying that MCM might be haunted. During the player's quest to steal the Mimic's blueprints, they'll occasionally see the Tiger, a ghostly costume of David's tiger plush, who appears before quickly vanishing without a trace. He's present twice as mini jump scares, and can also be seen on some of the security cameras. But things get cranked up towards the game's ending. After Arnold steals the Mimic schematics, he takes a shortcut through the MCM tunnels, where he encounters the White Tiger. He teleports around, causes lights to flicker, and makes some creepy giggling sounds. Some details do hint towards him being the Mimic, such as mechanical sounds as he moves and him mimicking Edwin, but it seems very likely that it's David's ghost. Anyways, this is by far the most terrifying part of the game. The atmosphere is tense, and the tiger teleporting around, sometimes in front of the player, is super creepy. Having a ghost character in a FNAF game again is awesome. Like I've said, I love the newer sci-fi animatronics with more developed personalities, but finally having another ghost character is fantastic, and a great return to the supernatural events that made the original game so intriguing. Speaking of the newer animatronic personalities, let's take a look at them. Since Sister Location, the animatronics have been given voices and more personality. This was taken to a whole new level in Security Breach, where the animatronics not only had voices, but very prevalent human-like personalities and flaws. It made them much more intriguing as characters. I like their fleshed out personalities compared to the silent killers of the first couple of games. They also have some phenomenal voice acting. However, in Security Breach, I don't think the personalities were implemented in a way that made the game scary. While the voice actors did a fantastic job, their dialogue felt kinda standard, mostly when it comes to Roxy and Monty. I like it when the killer animatronics keep up their friendly facade, since it plays into the horror of these animatronics designed to entertain children turning into killers. However, Monty and Roxy are just super aggressive. Montgomery is an angry, destructive gator, while Roxy's aggressive tendencies are due to her low self-esteem. I think it's some interesting shades to their characters. But unfortunately, during the main gameplay, they just come across as generic mean villains. In Sister Location, the animatronics either sounded super creepy, or with Funtime Freddy for example, he had a more playful personality befitting his role as a children's entertainer. The main appeal of FNAF is obviously its animatronics designed to entertain children, so it's good when their dialogue or personality leads into their role at their respective locations. However, with Roxy and Monty, they're just super mean. Glamrock Chica, on the other hand, actually feels threatening. Unlike Roxy and Monty, who mostly just spew insults, Chica leans into the aspect of these animatronics being around children. She actively tries to gain Gregory's trust, claiming his family is looking for him and offering to help. Speaking of family, I'm pretty sure my nephew Hanky watches this channel. What's up, dude? How's it going? Anyways, it feels much more disturbing how this animatronic is trying to deceive Gregory and coax him into giving himself up. It feels in line with her function of being a friendly animatronic. It's not like she's morphing into something obviously malicious, but there's now something lurking behind her friendly facade. And I know part of Roxy and Monty's personality involves them being kind of mean, but their characters just don't make the game scarier in my opinion, unlike Chica. I think Secret of the Mimic's animatronic threats are very similar to Glamrock Chica. In case you aren't aware, the three animatronic villains in this game are just the Mimic in disguise. During Jackie's chase, you can see the Mimic's eyes inside of her. The same goes for Big Top in his promotional artwork. And the Mimic peels itself out of Dolly at the end of her sequence. All three of these characters are the Mimic, but it's adapted to their bodies and personalities. All three of them have dialogue relating to their unique characteristics, rather than something just overly evil. Jackie continues to have a fun and playful personality, talking about presents and birthday cake. All of her dialogue is pretty much what you'd expect from a birthday clown, but the way it's delivered by the Mimic, copying her with a very distorted voice, makes the friendly dialogue much more disturbing. Then there's Big Top, who repeatedly asks for tickets in an aggressive voice. His personality remains intact, even as he becomes more destructive. He only has one line, so there's not much to say here, but again, he stays in character. Just like how Dolly's dialogue almost always refers to something medical, fitting her role as a nurse, albeit with some more out-of-pocket dialogue.
You need a lobotomy!
All of these characters retain their personality and dialogue from before the Mimic adapted to them, which I think makes their hostile behavior even more disturbing. Something else I thought this game did better was the gameplay itself. A significant issue I had with Security Breach was that many of its late game missions required running all over the Pizzaplex, with not much happening. In my opinion, the worst offender of this is the Mazer-Size quest. For this, you have to backtrack from Mazer-Size to the daycare. It's a long trek to get back there. And do you know what happens throughout that whole mission? Absolutely nothing. Just more staff bots that you have to avoid. The most exciting part is when the endoskeletons activate in the theater basement. Security Breach has a lot of instances like this, where you have to journey across the Pizzaplex to grab an item and nothing happens. And again, I love Security Breach, but a lot of its missions have boring steps like this. Luckily, Secret of the Mimic isn't like this. First off, you never really need to backtrack very far for the game's main missions. I think the furthest you have to go is back to the welcome show from the start of the game, and that isn't very far at all. Even better is that the Mimic actively pursues you throughout MCM. In Security Breach, the animatronics wouldn't follow you around the Pizzaplex. Instead, they'd usually only appear if you get noticed by the staff bots. However, some zones like the prize counter and Monty Golf, for example, are exceptions to this. It's not a bad idea to have the animatronics be summoned by staff bots, but there are so many staff almost everywhere in the Pizzaplex, making them pretty annoying after a while. On top of that, it would be so much more interesting to have the main animatronics always lurking around. Ruin, as always, improved upon this, having the Mex's entity appear in the AR network if you remain there too long, and they summon the other bots if you get too close to them. The entity is basically just a much more chill version of the staff bots. However, Secret of the Mimic does this even better. The game can't just let you roam around unbothered, but no one wants a repeat of the staff bots. So what happens is when you enter an area with costumes, you'll have some free time to walk around. But shortly after, the Mimic will adapt to one of the costumes and begin patrolling the area. Mannequins and dangling chains can also alert the endoskeleton to your location. I think this is a great mechanic. You're not being constantly bothered like how the staff bots were, but you also can't just walk around MCM without active threats. And another good thing is the Mimic can appear in every area, so you have some leeway. Overall, this is a very solid way to keep the endoskeleton hunting down the player without any more staff bot scenarios. Another gameplay element that I think was improved upon were the chases. Security Breach and Ruin had a couple of chases, but it felt like they were all lacking. The enemies were either too slow or the whole chase consisted of running with nothing happening around you. I always find chases more interesting when they interact with the environment around you, such as the DJ Music Man chase. The first chase in Secret of the Mimic features the titular endoskeleton wearing Jackie, and is an incredibly strong start to the game. It begins with Jackie ripping herself out of her box and violently destroying the Digityper, all with some fantastic animations, which continue to be great throughout the rest of her chase. She then violently throws the bot through the wall. This whole opening to the chase is already very destructive, establishing the Mimic as a powerful threat. After escaping deeper into MCM, Jackie pursues Arnold throughout the building, giving us some terrifying glimpses of her before she pops out of a vent and begins chasing him. She stretches her arms throughout the area and destroys the platforms Arnold is running on. Having the environment react to Jackie is awesome, already a huge step up from the chases in Security Breach. Big Top's chase goes even farther with this. It begins with him climbing down through the ceiling and destroying a staircase, which eventually leads to him tearing apart the MCM offices too, making this a crazy and intense chase as the animatronic breaks the building around you. On the other hand, Dolly's chase is the only one that I don't think reached its full potential. It's not bad, but Dolly only appears at the start and end of this chase. The whole middle part just has Arnold running around without Dolly pursuing him. The stealth segment at the end is pretty creepy, and the sequence where Dolly tries to break into the elevator is awesome. I just wish the chase had a little more going for it. The final chase with the Mimic, however, did not disappoint. It starts off with a sudden and terrifying reveal of the Bear Mimic endoskeleton, before you run further into Murray's house, and accidentally start a fire, which makes this final chase even more intense. After descending into the tunnels between the house and MCM, the Mimic jumps down and right through the elevator. It then effortlessly tosses aside the debris blocking its path, which is just an awesome start to this final stretch of the chase. It even follows this up by crawling on the ceiling and dropping down in front of Arnold. Then shortly afterwards, it breaks through a security door. This chase is awesome. The Mimic's destructive behavior is greatly showcased here, as it is in every chase, and it looks terrifying. All of this combines to make a very intense and incredible final chase, and that's not even including the part at the end when it jumps onto the catwalks. It slows down long enough for the path above it to crash down onto it, but the threat of being crushed doesn't diminish the Mimic's bloodlust. It holds onto the platform with one arm and reaches for Arnold with the other. Pretty much this whole chase is just the Mimic being awesome and strong. It is a great finale for this game, and it certainly feels like they saved the best for last. Speaking of last, the final phenomenal part of this game we'll be discussing is the story. The Five Nights at Freddy's story can sometimes be pretty confusing. Case in point, Security Breach. The story in that game is pretty vague or simply non-existent. There are a couple things years later that still aren't clear as to what they mean. These issues stem from a lack of communication between Steelwool and Scott Cawthon. Scott wasn't entirely upfront as to what the game's story entailed, so a lot of his original intent didn't carry over to the full game.
And I had a specific story for this in mind. Okay, for Security Breach, I really did. I had a very specific story in mind, and it is very different than the one that got in the game. And I think a part of that is the way that I conveyed that to Steelwool, because what I was trying to do was I was trying to tell Steelwool to do specific things throughout the game, meanwhile not telling them what the story plot was. Because in my head, I was thinking, okay, when people find this, they will connect this to this to this, and it will all be revealed. And I thought I could do that without telling Steelwool the story plot. That didn't work out very well because they got all of these pieces and they thought it was their job to connect them in a way that made sense. They were taking pieces they didn't fully understand and trying to craft a story out of them. And again, I don't blame them for that. I blame myself for that, because I guess what I should have done is just said, hey, here's the story. Here's why these pieces are here. Here's how they're supposed to connect.
As with everything else, Ruin showed clear improvement. The DLC had a simple and comprehensible story, but still left some unanswered questions that the fans or future installments would have to solve. Secret of the Mimic is pretty much the same. A lot of the Murray's and Mimic's story is told through dialogue and messages, which is especially important as this game serves as the origins for the new endoskeleton villain. So the story needs to be comprehensible, and luckily it is. In classic FNAF style, some story elements are a bit mysterious, but overall it's a very clear and very compelling story. A big issue I have with FNAF is how its story is so tragic, yet the series rarely touches on the emotional impact. The books, Pizzeria Simulator, and the movie are the only times when I think the writing has properly delved into how tragic FNAF's story is. Not to say other parts of the series don't have emotional moments, but it feels like it's a rare occurrence. Secret of the Mimic, on the other hand, is a story drenched in tragedy, and the game never lets you forget that. While we're discussing the story, let's talk about the elephant in the room. With the release of Secret of the Mimic, we now know that the Mimic's Tales from the Pizzaplex origin story isn't canon, which is a bit controversial. And I understand. I was a big fan of the books and the way they told the Mimic story. It's a huge reason why I liked the character in the first place. However, I'm an even bigger fan of this game. It keeps a lot of elements from the original story that I liked, and added a lot of things that improve the story and gameplay. So if we have to push aside certain elements of the books to make way for something even better, then that is fine by me. I also think it's great that fans no longer have to read the books or watch YouTube videos recapping them. Although you should still totally check out our videos about Tales and the Mimic story. That ad revenue is sweet. But anyways, it's great to have the Mimic story told in the games. The best part is how Fiona gets to play a bigger role in the story. In Tales from the Pizzaplex, she's more of a plot device rather than a character. She only exists to give birth to David and die. In this game, however, Fiona lives through childbirth and becomes a major character in the story, until she dies. This time at Fall Fest. A fate foreshadowed in Help Wanted 2, but Edwin brings her back with M1, the first iteration of the Mimic program, which is implied to begin mimicking Fiona after watching David's birthday tapes. I don't want to dive too far into the story or speculation, so if you are interested in learning more, I'd recommend checking out our Mimic lore video. I will say though, I got a couple of comments on that saying that M1 is possessed by Fiona, but that's not the case. Even Edwin says it.
Oh, who am I kidding? You're not really you. Oh, I've been so stupid. You. I let a machine raise my kid. You're not real. What was I thinking?
You do not mean that. It is me. I'm Fiona.
Stop talking like her. You're not her. I never want to hear or even think about you ever again. Ever!
So while M1 isn't Fiona, it's still an interesting way to keep her present in the story, even if it is just an AI program copying her. I think M1 is an interesting character and serves as a good origin for the Mexis security that later keeps the Mimic imprisoned. I also love how you don't need to be a FNAF fan to understand the story. For example, before this game came out, I was trying to get my friend interested in it, and I was afraid that the game would require too much context from the books and other entries such as Ruin. But the whole story is pretty self-contained. Sure, experiencing those other entries does give you a pretty good idea of what to expect, and a much bigger appreciation for how this game sets up the other installments. But even if you have zero clue about anything, the game presents you with a pretty clear story. I also think this game handles the multiple endings much better. In Security Breach, if you just follow the normal route the game presents you, you simply get an ending where Gregory escapes but is caught by Vanny. That's just how the basic ending goes. No story reveals or anything. This ending left me wanting more, but in a bad way. It felt very underwhelming, and sure, you could argue that's just to encourage players to discover more endings. But it kinda just felt like nothing. Let's compare that to Ruin, where just the normal ending features the Mimic's reveal, chase, and a massive cliffhanger. That's a great way to still give people an interesting ending even if they don't go out of their way for it. Secret of the Mimic's normal ending doesn't include as much gameplay as the other endings, but it still shows off a lot. It reveals the Mimic Endoskeleton's appearance, the mock Freddy's under MCM, and the twist that we weren't talking with Dispatch. The ending leaves out a lot of gameplay, but it still shows enough that I think it leaves you wanting more in a good way, unlike Security Breach where the normal ending had nothing going on. In conclusion, I think Secret of the Mimic is a massive improvement over Security Breach in almost every way. It is fantastic to see Steel Wolf so clearly improved, and I think Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay is in good hands with them. It also seems like Scott and Steel Wolf have improved with their storytelling a lot, especially with how clearly they managed to tell this installment story. Five Nights at Freddy's is in a great place right now, and I can't wait to see what's next. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and joining our monthly membership. It helps support us, and you get a bunch of cool perks like shoutouts in our videos, custom emojis, badges next to your name, exclusive looks at upcoming projects, and more. Thanks for watching, and check out some of our other videos.